Two leaders shaped by a state like no other.
I have this passion because I truly believe in Texas exceptionalism.
They want your support to lead Texas into the future.
I've always said public service defines itself. It's service to the public.
A choice for voters.
I want to do everything I can as governor to keep Texas the most exceptional state in the United States.
Between competing visions.
Instead of pointing out all our differences, we should be pointing out the things we have in common.
Now the top candidates take the stage in the Texas gubernatorial debate.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for a special edition of State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. 30 minutes from now, Governor Greg Abbott will face Democratic challenger Lupe Valdez in their only debate of the campaign season. We'll bring it to you live. As we count down to that debate, we want to give you a closer look at both candidates and the experiences that shaped them and led them to the leadership roles they have. But first, we want to give you an idea of how this debate will play out. Our Robert Hadlock will be hosting the debate from the LBJ Library, and as he shows us, this setup is a little different than other debates.
That's right, Josh. The biggest difference this week is there is no studio audience here in the Frank Irwin Atrium. Remember last week in Dallas they had one during the Senate debate. That is because that was one of the really hard demands that was made by Governor Abbott, that there be no studio audience. There is an audience, however, downstairs in the LBJ auditorium, split 50-50 between the two candidates. Each candidate will get 60 seconds to answer the questions that are asked tonight, and there will be a rebuttal period. We have 4 journalists from various television stations in Texas. Among them is Julie Fine, who was a moderator of the debate last week involving Beto O'Rourke and Senator Cruz. It'll all begin at 7 o'clock here on KXAN. We'll see you then.
Thank you, Robert. As he just told us, there is no live audience in the room with the candidates, but there is a crowd of supporters for each candidate gathering nearby. Politics reporter Phil Prazen joins us from Bass Lecture Hall at the LBJ Library, where people will be watching the debate. Phil?
Well, Josh and Robert, I'm just across the way from where the debate is going to take place at a lower level of the LBJ School of Public Affairs here at the University of Texas at Austin. The crowd's just coming in to watch the debate. As you can see, they'll be watching it right up there on this big TV screen. Here in the auditorium. That's me, as you see. And then over here we have supporters of Lupe Valdez. She gave some of her tickets to major labor groups. I talked to some people from the AFL-CIO, which is a prominent Texas labor organization. And then on the other side, you'll have the supporters of Governor Greg Abbott. He gave a lot of his tickets to well-known law enforcement organizations. I talked to some people from the San Antonio Police Association. So it's there's still some room here. People are still filing in, and we will. It will be a pretty lively audience. They're going to keep it respectful and just do more cheers and not that many boos, hopefully. But right now, we'll send it back to you in the studio.
After the Texas gubernatorial debate, we'll bring you live in-depth analysis. We'll be joined by a panel of journalists, including Joy Diaz, the producer for the Texas Standard on KUT Public Radio, Lauren McGaughey, the Texas government reporter for the Dallas Morning News, and Carlos Sanchez, the news and politics editor for Texas Monthly. And we'll also be bringing you some insight from some of the Texas voters who are undecided about the race for governor. We have a group of them here at our station right now. Our Sally Hernandez is live in the newsroom with details about a focus group gearing up to watch the debate. Sally.
Hi, Josh. Good to see you. Yeah, we have in this room behind me, we have about 24 registered voters. They intend to vote in this race in November. The thing about this group is they are registered as Democrats, Republicans, or Independents, but all of them say they are undecided in who they want to vote for. So after the debate, we may get a good idea of who they want to vote for. And we'll also get a good idea of what they think about the candidates' reaction to some of these answers, because as they're watching along with you at home, this group has this in their hand. It's a dial. So they could set it when they hear a candidate's answer to 50, and that's kind of average, right? They don't think it's unfavorable, their answer. They don't think it is and very favorable. But if they turn it to lower than 50, they think the lower the number, the more that they didn't like that answer. The higher the number, the more they like that answer. So this style goes all the way from 0 to 100. So in this room right now is that focus group that we were talking about. They're going to watch that debate with you. Turn those dials downward to indicate an unfavorable reaction. Turn the dials the other way to indicate that they have a favorable reaction. And then at the conclusion, we're going to talk to this group one more time. We're going to learn how their opinions about the candidates have been impacted because of the debate, and if they've now decided, Josh, who they're going to vote for.
A freak accident put Greg Abbott in a wheelchair permanently, but a decision he made about his recovery put his life on a new course.
If I spent any time on trying to be able to walk again, that would be time lost, and I wanted to get on with my life.
A story of overcoming a devastating injury and the choices that led to the governor's mansion. Insight into Greg Abbott's life next on this special edition of State of Texas.
We're taking a closer look at who the candidates are tonight. Governor Greg Abbott won the pre-debate coin toss, which means he'll take the first question in the debate. With that in mind, we will start with Governor Abbott as we begin our look at the stories behind the candidates. Phil Prazen shows us Abbott's life forever changed when he was 26 years old.
On July 14th, 1984, an ambulance rushed Greg Abbott to the hospital. An oak tree fell on the 26-year-old while jogging with a friend. He spent a month in the hospital and 6 weeks in a Houston rehab facility. While he watched other patients devote their lives to regaining the ability to walk, Abbott turned down experimental treatments. He'd use a wheelchair the rest of his life.
It immediately clicked that if I spent any time on trying to be able to walk again, that would be time lost. I never allowed myself to be weighed down with, oh gosh, would have I done this or that, or how my life would be different. Instead, I always cast my eyes forward and move forward in life as opposed to constantly looking back.
Greg Abbott was born in Wichita Falls. His family moved around northeast Texas before settling in Duncanville. When he was in high school, his father passed away of a heart attack.
It was a big loss, and there's a vacuum in your life whenever you lose a parent. And it immediately thrust more responsibility on my mom, and it thrust more responsibility both on myself as well as my brother.
He excelled at track and field, was voted most likely to succeed, and graduated from the University of Texas at Austin. That's where he met Cecilia. The couple married in 1981, and 3 years later, just before the bar exam, that accident left him paralyzed. In the months ahead, his new life tested his faith.
Why did this happen? How could you allow something like this to happen, etc.? But I found that the more I asked, the more questions seemed to be provided with solid answers.
And one of those answers was Cecilia.
You take an oath for better, for worse, in sickness and health, until death do we part. At a time of a marriage, that's so easy to recite. And she was put to the test in sickness and in health, but it was a challenge that she embraced with great support from me, and that made our relationship and our marriage even stronger.
He passed that bar exam and went on to practice law in Houston. The Abbotts adopted their daughter Audrey and began planning a future for her, while he decided to make the next step. He grew frustrated when he thought local judges missed the mark on the law.
The reason I went to law school to begin with is because I cherished the rule of law in this country. I wanted to make sure that it was preserved and passed on. I wanted to be a judge myself so that I would do it right.
His work as a Harris County judge caught the eye of then Governor George W. Bush, who appointed Abbott to the Supreme Court of Texas. And when the incumbent Texas Attorney General moved on in 2002, Abbott ran for the job and won. A path that eventually led him to the governor's mansion. And some of his major accomplishments as governor so far in his first term, he pushed lawmakers to pass budgets that included nearly $4 billion worth of tax cuts, which included earlier dedicating more money to early childhood development and transportation. Now, he tried to get lawmakers to go along with sweeping ethics reforms, and they never really quite gave him what they wanted during both the sessions. But his most famous bill signing was Senate Bill 4. He declared it an emergency item the last regular session. It required local law enforcement officials to hold people who committed crimes here illegally until federal immigration officials pick them up for deportation, and it also allows local police to ask immigration status of the people they arrest. Now, that new law was major motivation for Governor Abbott's now opponent, Lupe Valdez, to launch her campaign against him.
If you see harm, you either stop it or do something about it, or speak out.
And we're going to take a closer look at her story and some of the experiences that led her to take on this campaign. That's next on this special edition of State of Texas. Welcome back to this special edition of State of Texas here before the governor's debate between incumbent Republican Greg Abbott and the challenger Democrat Lupe Valdez. Earlier, we took a look at Governor Greg Abbott's life. Now we turn to Lupe Valdez, and her story is a story of firsts. She was the first Latina and LGBT Texan to lead a major law enforcement agency. Lupe Valdez grew up in one of the poorest areas of San Antonio. Her parents were migrant farm workers, and she remembers being turned away at a Dallas County restaurant because the staff wouldn't serve Mexican Americans.
To stare at your parents and go, why can't we eat here? You know, and parents have to choose how they explain things to you.
But one day at junior high, a substitute teacher noticed her good work and told her she could make it to college one day.
I remember he used to take the bus because he came right from the other side of town, and he took the time to miss his bus schedule or whatever to talk to me so I could find opportunity.
So she began riding the bus herself to a high school on the rich side of town. That led to college in Oklahoma City. After that, she enlisted in a tank battalion in the United States military and became a captain in the U.S. National Guard.
There's a teamwork in the military that I wish we could package more on the outside. Every job depends on somebody else, and you've got to be able to work together to make it happen.
She was a pioneer in male-dominated fields, in the county and federal prison systems, as an undercover federal agent tackling white-collar crimes, and as a U.S. Customs agent.
You're taught that when you can't find a way, you go out and make a way, make it happen. And so as a group of small women, we made it happen.
And then in 2004, she decided to get into local politics, running for Dallas County Sheriff. No Democrat had won in decades.
You know, at that time, being lesbian was not as easy as it is now. Although it's never easy, it's easier. And at that time, it wasn't. And I remember several people saying to me, you know, that's the first thing that's going to come out. They're just going to smear you up and down with us. And so I had to be comfortable that I wanted to do this bad enough to take whatever was coming.
She came from behind to win, not just that time, but 3 other times. And years later, when she won the Democratic nomination for governor, she reflected on her poverty and the restaurant that turned her family away years ago.
I was elected the sheriff of the same town that turned us away.
And now she's again an underdog as she aims for the top spot in the state. And before Valdez was sheriff of that department, there were a lot of corruption allegations with the sheriff's department, and the jail failed state and federal inspections. She was credited for turning that agency around for the most part. And then she was also appointed by then President Barack Obama to be a part of a committee on immigration reform in 2011. But Governor Abbott and Sheriff Valdez have tangled before over the debate surrounding SB 4 and requiring her jail to hold more people for deportation proceedings. So, Josh, in just a few minutes, the 2 candidates will get their chance to present 2 very different views of this state and the future of this state.
Welcome back. It comes as no surprise that Texas is divided along party lines just like the country. Texas issues are American issues. So we reached out to some supporters of the candidates to talk about what challenges lie ahead and how Governor Abbott or Lupe Valdez could handle them.
Not only will 2 candidates square off, but 2 ideas of Texas, a booming economy and clogged roadways, record jobs, tiny unemployment, along with the largest number of people without health insurance, some of the best universities and some of the most crowded schools. And add in one massive hurricane.
I think in times of crisis, that's when real leadership shows through, and the way that Governor Abbott has handled the post-Hurricane Harvey response has been tremendous. I mean, hurricanes are very difficult issues to respond to. Once the cameras go away, it's not that the crisis is solved.
Deirdre DeLisi entered politics in the 90s when Republicans began to take control of state government. She then worked as chief of staff for former Governor Rick Perry and chairwoman of the Transportation Commission. She says managing the state's growing economy and population will be the governor's primary task in the next 4 years.
People are moving to Texas. Over 1,000 people a day are coming to the state because of what they see Texas offers. They see Texas offers jobs, opportunity, and a great education system for their kids. And so that's wonderful, but it's taxing on our infrastructure, it's taxing on our roads, it's taxing on our schools.
But while some see growth, others see people left behind.
We have a shrinking middle class, and that's in part why people are just done with the politics that have gotten us here, done with the lip service, and want to see somebody who gets what they've been through. And Sheriff Valdez is that person.
Austin Representative Gina Hinojosa is an up-and-coming Texas lawmaker focusing on public education. Before this, she was a school board trustee at one of the state's largest school districts. She describes the state's biggest challenge ahead is ensuring the state does not form a vast underclass of people with no way up the ladder.
She has experienced herself the vast benefits of a good education. She beat the odds because of it, and she understands the importance of it.
And the debate will soon play out between those who believe low taxes and low regulations are right, who say if the leadership isn't broke, don't fix it.
A rising tide lifts all boats. There's a reason why people are coming to Texas.
To creating an opportunity for those at the bottom and the quest for new blood at the top.
Despite working full-time jobs, struggle to ever have a mortgage, with health care. These are the basic promise of what was thought to be a middle-class lifestyle.
Texans will soon decide after the two candidates face off on stage Friday night.
And that debate is just minutes away. Both candidates are getting ready to go into the hall, and the audience is gathering in a nearby auditorium to watch. That's where politics reporter Phil Prazen is standing by live. Phil, remind us who's in the audience.
Well, yeah, actually more people have shown up, and it's almost a packed house. On the left, you'll see Lupe Valdez supporters. AFL-CIO is here. On the right, you're going to see Abbott supporters and law enforcement groups from around the state of Texas. They've come to cheer on their candidates.
Immigration is going to be one of the key topics in the debate tonight. We talked earlier about the differences between Governor Abbott and Sheriff Valdez. We'll likely see those differences play out tonight also.
Yeah, their fight before this has really been about immigration. If you remember, Governor Abbott prioritized SB 4, deemed a law against sanctuary cities. Lupe Valdez was a very strong critic of that. That law ended up passing, but she's been a critic of that law, and then also a critic of his dedicating resources towards the border, signing budgets that dedicate really hundreds of millions of dollars to border security. That has been the #1 issue for Republicans, and the Governor Abbott has delivered on that.
Before we go, I know that both candidates say that they support Texans' right to own guns, but there are some sharp differences too.
Sharp differences, especially after recent high-profile shootings here in Texas. Santa Fe High School, Sutherland Springs. They're going to have two very different viewpoints on who can have a gun, when, and where. And so expect that to come up tonight as well. Josh.
All right, Phil, thank you very much. We will check back with you after the debate. And thank you for joining us. I'm Josh Hinkle. We'll be back in 1 hour to bring you post-debate perspective in an extended special edition of State of Texas.
Two visions for the future of Texas. The top candidates in the race for governor squared off on the debate stage.
I believe in a path for citizenship for the dreamers. Therefore, we need to prepare them to be here and be educated.
With ideas for where Texas is now and where we should go in the future.
The important thing that we do in the state of Texas is our job first is to make sure we educate Texas students.
We tracked a group of undecided voters to see what they thought of the candidates and if the debate changed any minds.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for a special edition of State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. The candidates for governor have spoken. The one and only debate between Lupe Valdez and Greg Abbott is now complete. Both candidates shared their thoughts on the issues facing Texas, ranging from immigration to property taxes, Harvey relief, and toll roads. We watched the debate along with a group of undecided voters divided among Democrats, Republicans, and independents. They reacted to candidates' answers using a dial system. When they liked what they heard, they turned the dials upward. When they didn't like it, they turned the dials down. We recorded all the responses using a real-time graph which showed the lines moving up and down depending on what people in the focus group thought. The red lines represent the Republican reaction. Democrats are in blue and the independents are in yellow. When the lines hover near the middle, that means that these people felt neutral about what the candidates are saying. So let's get started. We asked, in the aftermath of mass shootings, students say they feel that they're not safe in school. We asked the candidates if they think arming teachers is the answer. Only Republicans in our focus group liked the idea of arming teachers, while other ideas the candidates talked about were more popular.
We continually fortify our schools, but we won't invest in education. We want to arm our teachers, but we won't pay them as the professionals that they are. I believe they should be there to teach and take care of the children as they're doing now.
The main thing that came out was, for one, we have to enforce current law. Number two, the state must provide better mental health resources for students at school, for people in our state. And then the last thing is we got to make sure that we provide alternatives in our school for them to be more secure. Some schools want to have metal detectors, other schools want to have other strategies. We need to give schools the strategies they choose to make sure their students are safe.
We're joined by Joy Diaz, the producer for Texas Standard on KUT Public Radio, Lauren McGaughy, the Texas government reporter for Dallas Morning News, and Carlos Sanchez, the news and politics editor for the Texas Monthly. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
So we saw the lines going up and down. What was your reaction to what they were saying beyond just arming teachers in schools?
Well, I thought it was interesting that when Governor Abbott started to talk about mental health, it looked like everyone was interested in that. All the lines kind of went up, yellow, blue, and red. But then when he started to talk about maybe giving the schools a little bit more of a say over whether they wanted to bring those guns in the schools, the blue line just dipped straight down. So, I mean, no surprise, right? Everyone wants kids to have access to more services, but when it comes to the guns in the classrooms, it's a pretty big split.
It'll be interesting, too. I saw the lines diminish when what Governor Abbott was saying approximated talking points. And I'm just curious to see how the focus group will react when it's very obvious that talking points are at play.
And we know that mental health is like a big umbrella that is often used because the community that is affected by the lack of funding when it comes to mental health hates the fact that they're always scapegoated when it comes to the use of guns.
Well, we asked the candidates also about whether they support red flag laws, and Governor Abbott did not, and neither did Democrats nor independents like that.
Would not support a red flag law that would take guns away from people without due process.
This is not about continual gun violence. This is about stopping gun violence. I think the governor has confusion between gun ownership and gun violence. There is a difference between people who own guns and act appropriately and people who don't.
It was neutral for a long time right there.
Yes, but it's super interesting because this was one of Lupe Valdez's finest moments during the debate where she, you know, put the governor on the spot and she said, basically, are you confused when it comes to gun ownership or when it comes to gun violence? And that's a very interesting point to make when it comes to red flag.
What did you think, Lauren?
You know, I think that what the governor said is tracked with what he has said before about red flag laws. He asked the legislature to look at them, and then, you know, they seem to suddenly not be very popular with some people in his base. The gun groups didn't like them, so he said, you know what, maybe this isn't the right time to talk about this. And we saw his base respond very well to that. The Republicans liked him saying, I believe that red flag laws might be an infringement on the Second Amendment. So, I mean, that felt like a really partisan divide there as well. And I think what Carlos brought up about the talking points is really interesting because on so many of these issues, we know how these candidates feel already. We know that they're going to be completely split. So I'm interested to see on some of the more, you know, unscripted moments, what they think of how, especially Lupe Valdez responded.
And Josh, that is an interesting point. I think you noted that in this particular question, the response was flatlined with regard to the focus group. I think that that's because they perhaps didn't know the nuance of red flag laws. And what we saw tonight was a bureaucratic sounding governor versus an impassioned candidate challenging the governor. And the question becomes, will voters respond to that passion, or will they respond to the notion of someone who is firmly in control of the bureaucracy of state government?
All right, let's keep it there for now. Your property taxes keep rising, and it's happening all across Texas. We asked the candidates for governor what they would do to lower that burden. We'll look closer at their answers and how our panel of voters responded coming up. We're taking an in-depth look at the Texas gubernatorial debate and the response from voters. Our Sally Hernandez joins us live from our newsroom where we gathered a group of undecided voters. Sally, tell us a little bit about this group. How did they respond tonight?
They responded very well, Josh, with the dials in hand. A lot of them had a whole lot to say when it comes to the reaction of the response from Governor Abbott and Lupe Valdez. These, as you mentioned, were voters who came in undecided, a mix of Republicans, of Democrats, and independents. And we really wanted to know if the debate helped them in the end pick a candidate. So I flat out asked them that question. Our focus group had a mix, as we mentioned, of Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And not many people want to pay more in property taxes. I have to tell you, being in that same room, there was definitely an audible response to that question, especially when Governor Abbott said that he wanted to limit that when it comes to property taxes. So watch the spike from independents. They were definitely on board with that idea.
No government should have the ability to tax you out of your home. We got to remember this, Julie, and that is that people who own homes, they're not renters of the property from the city they're paying taxes to. And so we need to reform this in a way that will allow voter approval before taxes are increased.
It doesn't make sense to me that you keep pushing the burden down, but yet you won't allow them to do anything. The state needs to pay its fair share.
We're back with our roundtable. No surprise that property tax resonated so much with voters.
Oh, no, not at all. But you know what? In a bold move, I have to say it, because Lupe Valdez, the Democratic candidate, is very aware of how important this debate is and was. You know, it may have been the only chance that she had to have the ears of the state and the eyes of the state on her. So in a bold move, you know, the topic was property taxes, and she redirected to education, which is like the, you know, emblem that she's embracing. And so fantastic move on her part, I think.
Yeah, and she hasn't really had a specific plan with this so far. We've heard a very specific plan from Governor Abbott, though.
Yeah, that's what I was going to point out. My big question going into the debate was, will she wow the crowd? You know, will she have personality? And she had that in spades.
And will she be memorable?
Yeah, she was memorable, because that was the one thing she needed to do, right? She needed a gut punch. She needed something that people would say, oh, who's that? I think she did that, but where she lacked, which has been a criticism of her, is some of her plans are scant on the details. So we heard Governor Abbott criticize. He said, look, whatever she might be saying, I'm the only one on this stage that has provided an actual plan to lower your taxes. And she kept hammering him. I thought very well. She was very articulate on this. You're pushing the burden down to the local level, but then we didn't quite hear what would she do to education, how would she reform the system to fix that problem.
And that is kind of the ease and the challenge of being a challenger. It's the notion that you can throw rocks at the existing system, and the challenge then becomes, what would you do to change the system? I found it interesting looking at the focus group response. We're beginning to see now the divisions between Democrat and Republicans that are inherent. So to me, it suggests that they don't need, Lupe in particular, to go after that base. She needs to go after the independents. Well, to use a sports metaphor, she needed a knockout punch tonight, and while she was feisty in the ring, the knockout punch was far from coming.
Yeah,
I agree.
I should mention, though, that not everyone thought that there was a winner. You know, some people still don't have a choice after tonight's debate.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the problem we always have in Texas, right? People don't vote. So, you know, maybe they aren't, maybe neither one of the candidates are really bringing the fire to their veins, and they figure, you know, that Abbott guy's probably going to win, so is it worth me even voting?
And that's the key, I think, not for this particular race, because I think this race is a lock in many respects. It is the other races on the ballot, in particular the U.S. Senate race, and what impact either Lupe Valdez or Greg Abbott will have in turning out voters. And I think that's where tonight was significant, although unstated.
All right, well, some legislators have tried to overturn a state law that lets college students receive in-state tuition regardless of immigration status. Tonight, the candidates for governor told us where they stand on the issue.
The law is structured, is flawed, and it has to be fixed.
And you would repeal
it? So we're blaming the students for a broken immigration system? That's what we're doing.
Up next, we'll look closer at their answers and their ideas for the future of the Texas Dream Act. For the second question of the night, the candidates were asked about the Texas Dream Act. It allows undocumented students in Texas to pay in-state tuition at Texas universities. When asked whether or not he would repeal it, Governor Abbott said the law from 2014 was passed with good intentions, but has some flaws.
The law that passed said that these students who received in-state tuition had to demonstrate that they were on a pathway toward achieving legal status. However, there is no apparatus in the law to make sure that that, in fact, is being done. Hence, the law is structured, is flawed, and it has to be fixed.
And you would repeal
it? So we're blaming the students for a broken immigration system? That's what we're doing. We're blaming the students because they can't go through a decent immigration system, so we continue to blame them.
You know, the thing with the DREAM Act is super interesting. You always hear this is a problem that I believe Lupe Valdez had in this debate, and it is that she did not change the rhetoric. What she said is what we've been hearing for a long time. I think the most convincing argument I've heard comes from the business community in Texas. And what the business community has said is, we want people to spend money in Texas. And how do you get people to earn more than minimum wage? Well, you educate them. And if you educate them, you have a spending crowd. And I think that makes sense. You have an educated workforce, you know, they spend money. I think that's a more convincing rhetoric. However, I do understand what she was saying. You're blaming the students for not fixing an immigration system. But then again, the state of Texas cannot fix a federal immigration system.
Joy, I thought this was a question where very clearly it was passion versus policy. Governor Abbott talked in policy tones, and you had a flat line. Lupe Valdez began with a very passionate response, and her numbers spiked on terms of the response. I think this was her opportunity in the debate, and frankly, I think it was a missed opportunity ultimately. I think that she should have been more aggressive and more on the attack with Governor Abbott. This was an opening to talk about Senate Bill 4 and the implications it has for the Hispanic community and a large demographic in this state. And she did not take that opportunity.
She also didn't point out that the Texas Dream Act was a Republican proposal.
Absolutely.
This was a Rick Perry passed law that he was very proud of. And, you know, she could have said, you know, this was your own party that passed this, and now you're saying it's flawed. You know, where was that thought years ago? We've never had comprehensive immigration reform. She didn't say that either. So I did think that she, you know, she, like you said, was very passionate on the issue, but she did miss some entrees to attack Abbott for that. And I was curious to see if the bill is, if the law is flawed, what would be Abbott's fix? She didn't come back and say, well, then how would you fix it? Would you do away with it, or is there some other way?
Absolutely. The missed opportunity was just there, you know. Instead of focusing on what Texas cannot do as a state, it could have focused on what Texas can do, what you were mentioning, Senate Bill 4, and what would you do, Governor?
Yeah, and the flat line that you mentioned on the red and blue flat line when he started speaking in policy tones, right? That was surprising to me because the Texas Dream Act was a Republican proposal. I think that shows how the Republican Party nationally and in Texas has changed, because that was something that, you know, the red line maybe would have been a lot higher if it was Rick Perry talking about it, but now it's several years later and our views on immigration have changed.
Well, there was a clear political split when Sheriff Valdez talked about spending state dollars to secure the border, while most everyone liked the governor's answer about stopping human trafficking.
We need to put our money in Texas. Texas needs to use their money for things that will improve Texas, not things that the national government is supposed to be taking care of.
I want to go after the human traffickers, the sex traffickers, the cartel members, those who threaten us like gang members, the rise of MS-13 gang members in the state of Texas. I want to do something to put a stop to that.
Unsurprising. I mean, going after human trafficking is something that a lot of attorneys general across the nation are doing now. It's been a major proposal of our own attorney general here, Ken Paxton, going after those people. So I think everyone is for that, right? Everyone is ensuring that people aren't being trafficked, especially in a sexual nature. So unsurprising to me, but you know, interesting that it is kind of a party line issue, something that you're hearing all the time, and yet everyone's like, yeah, I'm for that. Let's do that.
Where I found fascinating is I think they reversed roles here. I think at this point, Lupe Valdez was talking policy, and Governor Abbott went after the passion. And it's the passion of fear-mongering in many respects. And that is something that has been very beneficial to achieving better numbers in terms of where voters are and where they want to be. And again, it was a missed opportunity. I also thought it was interesting. This is where Lupe Valdez in the primary was criticized because of her lack of knowledge about how much was spent for border security. So I think she was trying to demonstrate that knowledge, and I think it fell flat because it was more of a policy wonkish response.
All right, well, so who won the debate? As we said, we've been keeping score with our focus group of voters. A lot of other numbers out there. Who started the night undecided? See which candidate earned their support and what issues made the greatest impact. That's next on this special edition of State of Texas. Welcome back. We're taking an in-depth look at the Texas gubernatorial debate and the response from voters. Our Sally Hernandez joins us live from our newsroom where we gathered a group of undecided voters. Sally, tell us a little bit about this group. How did they respond to the debate?
Responded very well to a few topics, Josh, but one of the most notable topics when I was in the room with the focus group this evening is they had a very strong reaction to the topic of marijuana.
I'm in favor of expanding medical marijuana. Alcohol has no medical benefits, yet it's taxed and fined. We know that medical marijuana has some health benefits. Why can't we tax and fine those also?
I have seen, however, in other states that authorize that, abuses take place that raise concerns. So I'm still not convinced yet. However, one thing I don't want to see is jails stockpiled with people who have possession of small amount of marijuana.
You know, Josh, that topic probably got the most response from our voters this evening. And also, Lupe Valdez got a favorable response from our voters when she said she wanted to leave it up to the voters when it comes to expanding marijuana beyond medical use. And Governor Abbott also got a favorable response from the voters when he said he would consider loosening the punishment for 2 ounces or less of marijuana. Wanted to get back to the numbers here because before they left, we got a chance to ask this focus group. Remember, they came into the room as undecided voters, and I wanted to know if they were leaving with that same stance. So I had 2 questions for them that I wanted to share with you this evening. I said, in your opinion, who won the debate with the strongest performance? And 52% said Governor Greg Abbott did, 38% said Lupe Valdez, and 10% said neither. The other question, probably the most important for a lot of people, is after watching the debate, if the election were today, who would you vote for? 48% said Governor Greg Abbott, 43% said Lupe Valdez, and 10% were undecided. Josh?
Josh, I think the numbers or high numbers of undecided at the end of the debate represent a strategic victory for the governor. This was basically Lupe Valdez's only opportunity to make an impact across Texas. And he insisted on a forum that was very sterile. It was a forum that didn't include a live audience, although one was nearby. The energy was
specifically for that.
Yes, the energy was missing from the room, and the energy that was missing, I think, translated itself to a high number of undecideds at the end of this debate.
But interestingly, if the energy was missing from the crowd, I thought she brought it. She really, you know, while you said there was no knockout punch, she wasn't pulling them. And I thought that I saw a lot of her personality that I haven't seen before. And, you know, while there was still that 10%, amongst those people, there was still 48, 43. That's a pretty small margin. So while that, you know, isn't the electorate, it's not like that's what's reflected out there across the state. I thought that was interesting that she was able to almost break even.
And you know, Lauren, the interesting part was I think she was most effective when she interrupted the governor. It showed her passion.
I agree.
And that's when she really came across with regard to her personality.
I mean, one of her finest moments was when she was speaking about the rainy day fund.
Right, that was our favorite line.
Our favorite phrase.
Yeah.
We were talking about she needs a one-liner, a memorable one-liner, and she delivered. Governor, it rained.
All right, well, I'm going to interrupt us now. We'll have more analysis.
It is your finest moment.
We'll have more analysis right after the break. Welcome back to our special edition of State of Texas. Both candidates in tonight's debate did well with our group of voters when they talked about what made them proud to be a Texan.
There's no moment in Texas history that has made me more proud than to see the way our fellow Texans responded to Hurricane Harvey. That's what Texas is all about. These people on their own who got their own boats out to go rescue other people. It didn't matter who you were, what race you were. All that matters is you were a Texan, and a Texan was going to help you out.
Thank you, Governor.
I came from the poorest zip code in San Antonio and a migrant worker, from crop fields to classroom to candidate. From the poorest zip code in San Antonio to be able to be the candidate for governor and the governor of Texas.
Sure. You have some final thoughts for us, Joy?
Well, the thing is, if you want to serve the state of Texas, you have to be proud of the state of Texas. And I believe politicians in the state are. I mean, if there's one thing that we are not lacking in the state is good self-esteem. And so it always makes us feel good to say Texas and that we're Texan and all this. So it was a beautiful note to end with. And I believe that they showed their humanity, even their vulnerabilities a little bit.
And the focus group liked it?
Yeah, I liked that they didn't attack each other. We saw that last week with the Beto Cruz. There was, Ted Cruz had a little dig for Beto O'Rourke at the end of that, you know, say something nice about the other candidate question. This one, they didn't try to make it about, you know, well, my opponent does this, I'm proud because of this. So I thought, you know, they both just said something that they felt proud of, and it was a good moment.
What did you think?
Ultimately, both of these candidates have very compelling personal stories, and that moment illustrated the compelling nature of their stories.
Was there any other moment from the debate that we haven't talked about tonight that really did stick out with you?
Oh, yes.
Well, she already said the governor, it rained. I felt like Lupe Valdez must have practiced saying that because you could just tell she really wanted to hit him over the head with it. You know, because I write about Confederate issues, I thought that the governor has evolved on the issue of this plaque that's in the Capitol. He said that he would be in favor of the legislature taking it down and would work with them to take it down. It claims that slavery did not cause the Civil War. So that, to me, was the newsiest aspect of the night, but I'm a little biased because I cover that issue. So.
Interesting pivot that he took when he was asked about the bathroom bill.
Absolutely.
He didn't fully answer it the first time. They pressed him on it, and his answer was not as head-on as the governor usually is.
I would agree. Yeah.
So when we think about the people that were there in the audience, you know, backstage earlier we were talking about the audience was a lot of law enforcement personnel, but they were invited by Abbott's campaign. You know, just in a few seconds we have left, can you talk to me about what does that mean when a law enforcement community isn't backing Sheriff Valdez as much as maybe she would hope?
Well, she was very gracious in her answer about that. She said, you know, Governor, you hold the purse, right? And you hold it with vengeance, I think was her phrase. That the law enforcement community has to be respectful of the incumbent, and they normally are.
Would you agree?
I do, and it all comes back to money, really. Who has the cash to put their face out there? And we saw it right when the debate ended. We saw that new Abbott ad with his mother-in-law who is Hispanic, and targeting that vote right there. And that's what it comes down to. He has $20+ million in the bank. It's going to behoove him.
All right. Well, thank you all for being with us. We normally bring our show, State of Texas, to you on Sunday mornings. We hope that you will join us each week for the latest in state politics in Austin. We're on KXAN right here before Meet the Press. Elsewhere in Texas, check your local listings.
For the first time in decades, a race for a U.S. Senate seat in Texas is close, just a month before Election Day. We're taking a closer look at where Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke stand on the issues and how they want to represent you. That's next on this special edition of State of Texas.
For many Texans, the race for Senate is the top contest on the ballot. Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz are in a close race that's drawing nationwide interest. Our Phil Prazen brings us an in-depth look at the candidates, their backstories, and where they stand on the issues.
For anything to change in this country, those ideas need to go through the United States Senate. And right now, that body is so close, one state election could decide who controls that body. And for the first time in decades, the Texas race is competitive. Texas. It's the second largest state both in size and population. It's one of the most diverse states in the country with more than 10 million Hispanics. More than 1 million people have a license to carry a gun. 4.5 million Texans don't have health insurance, and more than 1.7 million people came to this state illegally. America's issues are Texas issues. The two candidates are young and they represent two completely different worldviews. The incumbent Senator Ted Cruz came to the spotlight as the state's Solicitor General. That's the person who's arguing for the state of Texas in court, including 9 times at the Supreme Court. That's more than any other lawyer in the state at that time. In 2012, he won a place in the Senate by upsetting a powerful statewide elected official, mostly by tapping into an unmatched pool of volunteer grassroots workers.
Imagine millions of courageous conservatives all across America rising up together to say in unison, we demand our liberty.
He drove the Senate to the right in the age of Obama, and he made waves the day he showed up in the Senate. He was a partisan enemy of Democrats and a thorn in the side of Republican elders.
When the majority leader looks us in the eyes and makes an explicit commitment, he is willing to say things that he knows are false.
And then he ran for president.
I am announcing that I'm running for president of the United States.
He hired some of the best political operatives in the Republican Party. He won the Iowa caucuses, and then he tapped into Christian and working class voters who wanted a completely different direction after President Obama. And he would have won the nomination if it wasn't for Donald Trump.
He is choking like a dog because he's losing so badly.
Nothing seemed off limits.
That is his first and last resort, is to go to sleaze.
Bad blood between the two continued all the way to the Republican convention.
Vote your conscience.
But then he lost, and he ended up supporting Donald Trump in the general election.
What happened to vote your conscience?
And now Cruz is a major Trump ally in the Senate. For the past 6 years, he has dragged the Republican Party to the right. He wants to spend more tax dollars on border security. He's against citizenship status for people here illegally. He says the government should play hardly no role in health care, and he's against limiting people's access to guns. His opponent, Congressman Beto O'Rourke, comes from a much different place. His views are completely contrasting Senator Cruz's. He fell in love with punk rock at an early age. He was arrested for burglary after jumping a fence at UT El Paso and arrested again for driving drunk. He worked in the internet and software world before entering El Paso politics. And just like Cruz, he came to office by upsetting people in power. He was one of the youngest members ever on El Paso City Council, and he used that position to criticize American drug laws. He even co-wrote a book arguing that the war on drugs had failed. Then he went to Congress in the 2012 election versus a very powerful Democratic incumbent. He believes everybody buying a gun should go through a background check, and he wants to ban high-capacity magazines. He wants a faster path for people to become citizens, and he wants to legalize the people who are here illegally now. a public option for health care, and he wants to take corporations out of the way. People get elected.
We're going to be the big answer to the small stuff going on in this country right now.
But to win, he's going to have to pull off one of the greatest political upsets in history. Texas hasn't elected a Democrat to the Senate in 30 years. That's my entire lifetime. Republicans control each branch of government, and there are 800,000 to 1 million more Republican voters in this state than there are Democrats. So why would this year be different? Well, there are two reasons. Senator Ted Cruz has built a reputation. Some love it, some hate it. And then there's the president. Moderates and suburban women are having a hard time putting an R next to their name because of the president's rhetoric, reputation, and all of these scandals coming from Washington. And we've seen Democrats upset Republicans across the country all year. And a lot of people are saying if it can happen in Alabama, why can't it happen in Texas? Remember that experienced professional textbook campaign staff that ran Senator Cruz's election for president? Well, they're here in Texas. And if Beto O'Rourke ran a race the way it's always been done, he's gonna lose. So he's not. Beto's campaign is decentralized, relying on these local Beto organizations to organize events in their neighborhoods. And then he's literally just driving around with 1 or 2 staffers in a car. He's spent more than a year going to all the 254 counties in the state.
By being in Brady, I have a better understanding of what's on the minds of those in Brady that I want to represent than by relying on a pollster in Washington, D.C. or some other part of the country.
The crowds are getting bigger and bigger. These black and white Beto signs seem to be everywhere, and he's raising money, a lot of money. Even with that $2,700 cap on individual donations, he's raising more money than Senator Cruz. But with all of that said, money doesn't vote and signs aren't people. And this all reinforces the myth of the undecided voter. I know very few people who are going to the polls and don't already know who they're going to vote for when they walk in the voting booth. There is a blue team and a red team, and whoever shows up more on Election Day wins. And Senator Ted Cruz excels in that partisan politic world. O'Rourke is trying to challenge that entire notion. Yes, earlier this year, Democrats showed up and nearly doubled their turnout in the primary election, but Republican voters still had 500,000 more people show up. This really is a story about the pinnacles of power in Texas now versus what it could be becoming. And we'll find out on Tuesday, November 6th.
Thanks, Phil. You'll get the chance to have your say in this race and all the others on the ballot in just a few weeks. Early voting starts on October 22nd. But remember, if you want to cast a ballot, you have to be registered to vote by Tuesday, October 9th. Thank you again for joining us for this special edition of State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. We'll be back on Sunday to bring you an in-depth look at Texas politics.